All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. We're glad you could take some time to be here this afternoon for the second of 3 trainings that we're doing on reporting under the landfill methane regulation. My name is Matt Harrison. I manage the short-lived climate pollutant policy section at CARB, and one of the things that we are responsible for is implementing the landfill methane regulation, or LMR. So a few weeks ago, we released new LMR reporting templates, and our goal in doing that was to provide a format for delivering complete and streamlined information that's required under the regulation, and also to provide a way to report information to the US EPA. So as part of rolling those out, we wanted to provide an opportunity to train landfill owners, operators, consultants, and district staff, or you all as potential users of the templates. So again, thank you for taking some time out to be here with us today. We have about an hour of materials to go over with you guys, a brief presentation, and then a walkthrough of the templates. And so we can get right into that. And to do that, I'll turn it over to the team to introduce themselves. Anthi?
Hi everyone, my name is Anthi Alexiadis, and I'll be giving you a demonstration of the new templates today.
Hi everyone, I'm Joe. I'll be moderating the presentation today.
Hi everyone, my name is Sean Pennell, and I'll be going over a little bit about the background of the LMR, introduce you to the templates, and then hand it over to Anthi. So we want to thank you all so much for attending these webinars. Today's training consists of 3 main parts. First, I will give a brief overview of the landfill methane regulation reporting requirements. Then I'll provide an overview of the new reporting templates. Anthi will then proceed with the follow-up presentation with more detailed demonstrations on how to access and use the actual templates themselves. And finally, we'll wrap up the training with any questions or comments you might have. Next slide, please. Today's training session webinar will be recorded. This will be an interactive training session, so we do encourage you to raise your hand with any questions at any time. We should have plenty of time for that. As we get to these periodic Q&A breaks, my colleague Joe will call on you to unmute yourself, and then we'll take the questions in the order that they're received. To ask a question or make a comment, please use the raise hand function in the GoToWebinar toolbar, which should be located to the right of your screen as shown on this slide. When Joe calls your name, please unmute yourself by clicking the red button and then proceed with your comment or question. The red arrow at the top of the toolbar should expand the control panel for additional options. Next slide, please. So the landfill methane regulation, or LMR, as it's often referred to, is the state's primary mechanism for controlling emissions from the waste sector. It was adopted as one of 9 discrete early action measures under AB 32, that's Assembly Bill 32, otherwise known as the Global Warming Solutions Act of 2006. As most of you probably already know, the regulation has been in effect since 2010, and between 2011 and 15, 23 local air districts entered into a Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU, with CARB to implement and enforce the regulation. The LMR established the most stringent threshold in the nation for landfills to install gas control systems. And it also includes comprehensive monitoring provisions to minimize methane emissions. The set of strategies and technologies required under the LMR for controlled landfills, that is landfills with a gas collection and control system, or GCCS, is estimated to capture at least 75% of landfill gas and reduce emissions by nearly 2 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. Next slide, please. Out of approximately 370 landfills across California, there are now over 190 landfills subject to the LMR. The LMR applies to all municipal solid waste landfills that received waste after January 1st, 1977. The following exemptions do apply. Landfills that receive only hazardous waste. Secondly, landfills that contain only construction, demolition, inert, or decomposable waste. And thirdly, landfills that are closed or inactive with less than 450,000 tons of waste in place. Next slide, please. Under the LMR, reporting requirements depend primarily on whether a landfill has or does not have a gas collection and control system. Uncontrolled landfills report limited information to CARB that is intended to determine when they will be required to install a gas collection and control system. For controlled landfills, the regulation contains prescriptive operational and monitoring requirements intended to ensure their GCCS are operated in a manner to minimize methane emissions. Next slide, please. Now I'll take a few moments to talk about the various report types that are required for landfills depending on whether they are controlled or uncontrolled. I know many of you are familiar with this, but I just want to take this opportunity to clarify some of the reporting terms since we'll be using them throughout the presentations. So for uncontrolled landfills, so landfills without a GCCS, the report type depends on the amount of waste in place at the landfill, in the landfill. Active landfills with less than 450,000 short tons of waste in place submit a waste in place report annually. Landfills equal to or over that 450,000 short tons of waste in place threshold must submit a heat input capacity report. This annual reporting continues until the heat input capacity, or HIC, reaches 3.0 million British thermal units per hour or greater. At that time, landfills can conduct a surface demonstration or proceed to install a gas collection and control system. Once a GCCS has been installed, control landfills submit more detailed information that demonstrates the GCCS is operating to standards prescribed in the LMR. And Alfie will go over these measures within the report templates just a bit shortly. Okay, next slide, please. Regardless of what type of report you are submitting, they are due March 15th or the first business day thereafter with data covering the prior year. For example, upcoming reports for the 2021 reporting period are due Tuesday, March 15th, 2022. Landfills and air districts that have not entered into a Memorandum of Understanding or MOU with CARB must submit the reports directly to CARB no later than March 15th. Landfills and air districts that have entered into an MOU with CARB, that is to implement and enforce the regulation, must submit the reports directly to their air district, and CARB also requests that a copy is submitted to CARB at the same time. So this March 15th deadline applies to both for both MOU and non-MOU districts. Next slide, please. Okay, so before we pause for questions, I just want to make one final comment about the reporting versus record keeping requirements. Everything I just covered, as well as we'll go through, as well as the templates that we're about to discuss in more detail, focus on reporting requirements. However, landfills, the landfill owner and operators are also required to keep records specified in LMR that are record keeping requirements, which must be made available to CARB or the district upon request. Next slide, please. All right, so we've reviewed the general reporting requirements, and I just wanted to pause for any questions before we move on to the report templates and then to Anti's interactive training. So again, any questions, let's go ahead and use that raise hand function, and Joe will call upon you and you can unmute yourself. We'll take a few moments here. And again, I just want to remind folks, if you do not have a question at this time, I know you're all waiting to get to the templates. We'll have plenty of time in the middle of the template demonstration and also at the end of the webinar. So keep that in mind. We'll just take 20 more seconds here, just give folks a chance if they want to ask something. And Joe, do we have any raising? Go ahead.
I do have a question received in the chat from David Ramirez. The question is, will recording on webinar be available?
We are anticipating on posting one of the recordings. We're just not sure which one. So we will try to get that recording up. We're not sure if it's going to be this one or one from the other trainings. Good question. And we'll provide the links to our website at the end of the webinar so you could access that when we do post it. And now we'll probably post that sometime after the last reporting training session, which will be next Monday, I believe. Any other questions?
All right, I see no other questions, no other raising hand. Sean, you're good to go.
Great. If you could proceed to the next slide, please, Joe. Okay, we're now moving on to the part that we're pretty excited about. Our team has worked super hard on these templates over the last several months now. And so we hope everyone will adopt this new system and find it as useful as we do. Next slide, please. As we transition to the reporting templates, I'll provide a bit of context for why we developed these tools in the first place. And then Anthi will, again, go ahead with our demonstration. So mainly we are hoping that to simplify the compliance and also to assist in ensuring accurate and complete information is submitted annually to CARB. While the use of these templates is voluntary, we believe using them will reduce the burden on owners and operators. We also feel that having a standard format may help avoid inadvertently omitting required information. And as you may already find that you are currently submitting, you may already find that you are currently submitting more material than is actually required of the LMR, and we'll cover some of those examples in the demonstration shortly. And in addition, for landfills that are subject to the federal emissions guidelines, the annual report template also includes fields to include that information that is required by the US EPA. And of course, the new report templates will also significantly improve our ability to efficiently review and interpret the information given annually. Next slide, please. As you'll see in the demonstration shortly, the templates are color-coded to indicate three main categories of information. Input boxes, which are cells in the Excel workbook, that are white designate information or data that is explicitly required for compliance with the regulation. Most of the input boxes throughout the two templates that you'll see shortly are this white category. The yellow input boxes with dash borders indicate additional information that is not specifically required in the regulation, but is useful to interpret the required data. As you'll see, these can be pieces of information that most of you are already submitting in the report, such as the year the landfill was open or closed, or contact information from the person who prepared the report. These are just a couple of examples. These yellow boxes are voluntary, but they do help us out a lot. And finally, the annual report templates include blue boxes to signify information that's not required under the LMR, but that is required by the US EPA. As we explained in the user guide, these boxes are included to simplify reporting by allowing you to submit one complete report to satisfy both the state and federal requirements. So again, attempting to reduce that burden on reporting entities. Next slide, please. So other required or supporting documentation that is not included in the workbook should be submitted as a separate document in addition to the completed report template. For example, these could be topographic maps, alternative compliance option requests, approval letters, design plans, or surface demonstration records. And while staff has made every effort to provide an input box for each piece of required information, we do understand that unforeseeable events or atypical situations may warrant additional explanation. So we invite you to submit a separate document to further describe or explain corrective actions. So these could be remonitoring repair timelines or other issues. So essentially any documentation that can assist in explaining the data or explain why there isn't any data, and this can happen, would be considered a supporting documentation, and you would send that along with the completed workbook templates. Next slide, please. Okay, so submitting a report is fairly straightforward. Before submitting a report, please save the report template as an Excel workbook. We do ask you that you please do not submit a scan image or convert the report template into a PDF or any of the other file type besides an Excel workbook. It is okay, however, if the supporting documentation is a PDF or other formats though. We also recommend using a file name that includes a reporting year, followed by the landfill name, and then the report type as shown in these examples. For now, we're still accepting reports the old-fashioned way through our LMR email. However, we are currently testing out a new online submission process, which will most likely be some kind of reporting portal. We're just not quite sure what that's going to look like yet. So make sure you're subscribed to our mailing subscriber list and to get any alerts when that is up and running, because a lot of these supplemental documentations are too large for our email service to handle. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, great. So we're ahead of schedule, and I just wanted to say we scratched the surface with the reporting templates. Now my colleague, Anthi Alexiadis, will take us through the reporting templates one by one. Anthi, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Sean. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to start off by downloading the templates from our website, and I'd like to suggest that you consider following along with me and download your own copy if you haven't already, so that way we can get some hands-on experience and make good use of our time today getting familiar with the templates. So right here on our home page, you'll see we've got these three handy quick links to the regulation, our guidance document, and the report template. So you could click right there and go straight to that download page. While we're here, I'll just point out a couple of other things. So we've got our contact information right here on the left side. This subscribe link is where you will click to sign up for our new email distribution list that's called the Landfill Methane Regulation Reporting topic. So you'll get those important notifications that we mentioned. Just above that here on the left-hand navigation panel, you'll see the meetings and workshops link. That's where we will post the materials associated with these trainings. And then right here is the reporting page. So I wanted to call your attention to this because there's, we've tried to compile all of the information that is useful for reporting entities. So you have a reminder of the various report types, the report due date, and how to submit the reports. And so once we get that new online submission portal ready to go that Sean mentioned, we'll include a link to that on this page. We've also recently added some information regarding the USC EPA emission guidelines, the federal plan, and California's state plan for compliance. And then right here underneath reporting tools, you'll see again that link to the report templates and user guide page. So right here we can download these links, and I'm going to go ahead and open up the user guide in case we want to refer to that later on in the training. And then I'm going to start out today by going over the report template that is for controlled landfills. So the first thing we're going to want to do here is save this file with the current reporting year and the landfill name. We'll open that up, and right here on the landing page, you can see we've included a couple of links so you can easily get back to the regulation or the user guide, and then a little bit of orientating information to help you make sure that you're using the right template. And here we see that same legend that Sean reviewed with us in the slides, reminding us that the information in the white boxes is required, the information in yellow is requested, and the information in blue is for the US EPA. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of tabs here, and I am going to go fairly in detail through them, but please do feel free to raise your hand at any time, and we'll pause about halfway through and go back to any tabs you may have had questions on. All right, so this first tab may actually be the last one that you complete. So once the report has been populated, the responsible official would come here and check the box to attest that all the information in the report is true, complete, and accurate, and just type in their name and the date here, just like they're signing a form. And then beneath that, we have the preparer or consultant's contact information. Now, that doesn't need to be the same entity as the responsible official, but we do ask that you consider providing us the person's contact information that you would want for us to reach out to in case we have any questions about the information that's in the report. Next is just some basic identifying information about the landfill. So the first thing we'll do here is select the landfill's name from the drop-down menu, and then identify the landfill owner and operator, and enter the Swiss ID number. And we have a little reminder here of the format that needs to be in. And I know some landfills have more than one Swiss ID, so if that applies to your landfill, there's space here for that. Next, we'll select the air district that the landfill is located in. And if your air district has assigned a unique facility identification number, go ahead and include that here, especially for those of you in MOU districts. That'll make sure and help the district identify the report with the right facility. And then next we have space for the landfill address. Now, something that we commonly see in reports is folks will provide the operator's mailing address or place of business. So we wanted to be sure and remind you, and there's a reminder in the user guide about this as well, that this should be the physical location of the landfill. Next, we will select the landfill's operational status. So that's whether the landfill is actively accepting waste. If it's inactive, that means it's no longer accepting waste, and closed means the landfill has been through final closure. And then you can provide the year that the landfill opened and closed. If it is an active landfill, you're welcome to leave this space blank or provide the anticipated future year of closure. Next, you'll select the collection system that best describes your landfill. So right now we're looking at the annual report template. So if you're using this report, it means you're a controlled landfill. So just select the option that best describes your landfill. Of course, later on in the template will be a space to provide more information about the types of devices that are in place. And then you'll provide the date the GCCS was installed and operational. We are only asking for the year here. So I know there may be cases where the GCCS was installed in one year and became operational next. So if that's the case, be sure and give us that year that it was finally operational. And then the last question here is just a yes or no, whether the landfill is operating under any alternative compliance options. And that's helpful for us to know if you have one of those in place, so that we can be aware of any exceptions to the regulation that have been approved for you. All right, so this next tab covers data for the reporting year regarding waste in place and cover types that are in place. So the first thing we're going to do here is put in the reporting year, and then you'll enter the amount of waste in place. And one thing I'll caution you about here is if you try to input the units or any symbols in that field where we're looking for a number, you're going to get an error there. So that really applies to any of the input boxes in the template where we're looking for a number. Make sure not to include any symbols or units or other words in there if possible. Next is the annual acceptance rate. So just like the waste in place, those should both be in short tons. And then this next field is really serves as a reminder to you to be sure that you're attaching the required topographic maps along with the report template. And then we have the space for the area of the landfill that's under final cover. Now this is something that the regulation requires to be shown in one of the topo maps. But we found much more often folks are just giving us that number in the body of the report, which is certainly fine with us and actually more convenient. So we've included space here for that as well. And then these next few fields are optional that describe the size and the extent of various cover types in place at the landfill. So again, that's information that is commonly being reported to us in most reports, and we do find it useful. So as we moved to a standard report format, we wanted to make sure that we're not taking away too many opportunities for you to provide information that we will find to be useful. This next tab covers the landfill gas that's collected over the report period. So the first piece of information you'll provide here is the expected gas flow rate. And you'll see throughout the template here and there, we've included these little notes or excerpts from the regulation to help remind you about the requirement that's associated with that input box. The next field is the quantity of gas that was collected along with its methane and carbon dioxide composition. And then here, if the landfill does not ship gas off site, you'll just select no, and then you can leave this final table here blank. Otherwise, select yes and let us know the recipient and the amount of gas that was sent off site. The next tab covers information about control devices and source tests. So here we have an optional field for the device ID, and that's really useful, especially for landfills that have multiple flares or engines, so you can identify each one of those devices. You know, it's often something simple like flare 1, 2, 3, 4, for example. And then we have a drop down for you to select the device type that best describes your piece of equipment. We have been through all the reports and tried to make sure that we have all the pieces of equipment that are currently in place at landfills. And if you ever have any question about which one is most applicable, you can reach out to us. There's also an other field here just in case that's needed. Next, you'll provide the installation year, the rating, the units that the rating is in, and the fuel type. So this is the main operating fuel for your device. That's almost always landfill gas. So if that's the case for you, you can just type LFG in there. And then you'll supply the quantity of gas that was combusted in each device. Now, of course, if you are metering the flow to each device, then that's what you would enter here for each device individually. I know in some cases there is, say, one metering point for multiple flares or engines. So if that's the case, you know, if you have a reliable way to estimate the flow to each device, for example, based on the % of operational time, you can take that approach. You're also welcome to just enter the total amount in one of the blanks. What we want to be sure to avoid here is repeating the quantity, the total quantity of gas in multiple rows, because that would make it look like you combusted more gas than was collected. Next, you'll provide the supplemental fuel type and amount. And another note of caution here, we often see folks say that no supplemental fuel was used except for pilot or startup fuel. And we do want to remind you that the pilot or startup fuel should be included there in your supplemental fuel amounts. Scrolling over here, we've got space for information about the source test. So you'll give us the date of the source test for each device, the methane destruction efficiency. And here again, I'll remind you, if you try to put in a symbol, you'll get an error there. So just give us that value. And then if you have engines, you can supply the outlet concentration there, the average combustion temperature. And here what the template will do is automatically calculate that minimum temperature limit for you. That's always going to be 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 28 degrees Celsius below the temperature that was established during that source test. Next, we have some fields for you to let us know if there were any issues with the source test. And then finally, for those devices that aren't required to be source tested annually, let us know the next date when a source test is due. This next tab is for the control device operating parameters. So for one example, this would be where you enter those low temperature 3-hour periods if you have an enclosed flare. So on this tab and most of the rest of them, you'll see up front some yes or no questions. And those are really intended to help us understand, for example, if this table is blank and you selected no, then we know that you didn't have any records that are required to be reported for that item. Otherwise, we might wonder if you just omitted that information on accident. And similarly here, these are to call attention to the fact that if you have a device other than an enclosed flare, or a boiler or process heater, you would need to scroll down to find the tables that are relevant to those operating parameters. Now here, one thing I wanted to point out is we know there can be cases where, let's say, for example, you conducted your last source test in July, but you have a low temperature period that you need to report, which maybe occurred in January. And at that time, you may have had a different minimum temperature limit that was in effect. So we've supplied this field here for you to identify the relevant limit at that time. So at this point, I want to take a break and pause in case we have any questions waiting before we proceed through the rest of the template. And of course, once we get through this template and any questions related to the annual report, then we'll switch over and cover the template for uncontrolled landfills. Joe, do we have any questions waiting in the queue?
No, I see no raising hands so far.
Great. Well, hopefully that's a good sign that everything here is pretty straightforward and self-explanatory. So please don't hesitate to raise your hand if you have any questions. And again, I'm happy to go back to a prior tab if needed. All right, so we'll move right along here then. The next tab is for your instantaneous surface emissions monitoring data. So the first thing we'll do here is identify the monitoring schedule. For most landfills, that will be quarterly. It may be annually. And then, of course, if you have some areas of the landfill that are required to be monitored quarterly and others that are annually, we also have an option for that. And similarly with the walking pattern, you would select 25-foot, 100-foot, or a mixed spacing interval. And then again, there's that handy yes or no question. So if you didn't have any instantaneous surface emissions that were above 200 that need to be reported for this reporting period, then you would just select no, and we would understand that there were no such readings. Otherwise, we'll complete this table. So we've included space here, the latitude and longitude here for those of you whose equipment tracks the location of exceedances in that way. Otherwise, in this space, you would provide a location description or the grid ID so that we can help connect the information in this row to where that exceedance is shown on your topographic map. Next, you'd provide the sampling date, time, wind speed, and the initial measured methane concentration. Now again, for instantaneous surface emissions monitoring, all readings above 200 are required to be reported. but only those that are above 500 parts per million are required to be remediated. So you may have some here that are between 200 and 500, and only for those that are above 500, you would go on to provide the date of corrective action and describe the corrective actions that were taken. So something I'll point out here, I know that often there are multiple corrective actions that are taken on various dates. So for example, the first thing you might try is adjusting some valves in your wells, or and you go back and remonitor, and if that you still have an exceedant, then maybe you add some more cover fill and compact that, etc. So this field can be expanded as much as necessary. You can give us a paragraph to tell us all about your corrective actions that were taken. We also invite you to, if it's more convenient, just submit a separate document describing those corrective actions, remonitoring timelines, etc. So here you might wonder, if you had corrective actions that occurred over multiple dates, which one of those dates should you include in this column? And that sounds like a good time for us to step away from the template and go check in with our user guide and see if it has an answer for us. So a couple of things I'll point out while we're here. The first page has some of the information, and the second page has some of the information that we went over with you in the slides today. And then right here, you'll see this sort of table of contents is also a quick link, so you can jump right to the part of the user guide that has instructions for the report template that you're working on. So here we're in the instructions for the annual report, and you'll notice that each of these bold headers corresponds to one of the tabs. And then likewise, each one of these underlined phrases matches up with one of the labels of the input boxes. So hopefully that makes it easy for you to go straight to the part of the user guide instructions that you're looking for. And then another feature we've included here is for each of those white required boxes, we've included a regulatory reference in case you need to go to the regulation and find out more information about that requirement. So we'll scroll on down here until we find our instantaneous surface emissions monitoring tab. And you can see we've also included some notes here of questions that we anticipated, or reminders of things that we've noticed in reports that we wanted to make sure folks are aware of, such as if you have exceedances detected during a compliance inspection, perhaps by the district or CARB, then you want to include those records in your report template. And here we have that corrective action date that I mentioned. We had a question on here. So the user guide is going to instruct us that if you had corrective actions that occurred on multiple dates and the leak was ultimately repaired, to enter the date when the final action was completed to bring the affected area into compliance. And then further, if the leak was not repaired within the reporting period, you can just leave that date box blank. So what we want to avoid is including an anticipated future date of resolution for that issue. And then again here under the corrective action description, you'll see that same note that I had, that you can describe that in the template, or you can refer to a separate document if that's more convenient for you. So hopefully you find the user guide to be helpful, and we are happy to update that as needed as we receive more questions and get a better understanding of how you're, if you're running into any issues with using the templates. All right, so back to the template now. If we scroll on over in that same row where you entered your initial methane concentration or exceedance, you would also provide any remonitoring dates and concentrations here in that same row. And then another feature that we hope will be helpful for you is if you had a third remonitored exceedance, the template will automatically calculate for you that 120-day deadline by which the area needs to be back into compliance, so we can easily compare that final remonitoring date and make sure that that was completed within that deadline there. This next tab is for the integrated surface emissions monitoring results. So it looks really similar to the previous tab, except of course here we're looking for the average exceedances that are above 25 parts per million. And again, you'll see the same remonitoring dates and concentrations that we saw on that previous tab. This next tab is for areas that were excluded from surface emissions monitoring. So here you would identify if the area excluded was a full grid or just a part of a grid, and describe that location or provide the grid identification number. Let us know what period that area was excluded from surface emissions monitoring, and then provide one of those reasons that's listed in the regulation. And if you're excluding an area under an alternative compliance option, you can refer to that here. Next is the component leak monitoring tab. So again, pretty similar to the surface emissions monitoring. You would identify the location, the date, time, the methane concentration that was observed, the corrective actions, and the remonitoring date and concentration. And of course, you'll notice here the regulation only allows 10 days for remediating these component leaks. And so, this information in the template corresponds to that. The next tabs are for the gas collection and control system downtime. So the first one is collection system downtime that exceeds 5 days. Now that does include the individual well shutdown. And so what we've instructed you to do here is if it's just an individual well that was shut down for a period of time, you would enter the well ID number. And otherwise, we've instructed you to write the word system. So that will explain to us that this was a period of shutdown for the entire collection system. And then you would provide the date of shutdown and startup, the duration of the downtime, and we have a drop-down menu here with a lot of the common reasons that we observe in reports for periods of downtime. So we'd ask you to pick the one that best describes the reason for your downtime, but we've also included a free form field for you to provide more information, or in case it doesn't quite fit in one of these reasons that we've identified in the drop-down list. The next tab is for control system downtime. So here, in contrast to the collection system downtime, we're not looking for individual device downtime, so long as there was one device that was operational and able to control all of the gas that was collected at that during that time, then that's not considered control system downtime, right? So as long as there's one device operating, that doesn't need to be reported. This has been a challenge for us in interpreting the way that folks are currently reporting. A lot of times we'll get, say there's 2 flares and we'll get 2 tables with all of the downtime for each. And it's a little bit challenging for us to compare those 2 tables and determine whether there were any overlapping periods where neither of the devices were operating. So really similar to that collection system downtime, you'll see the date and time of the shutdown and startup, the duration of the downtime, and the same list of reasons, along with a free form column for you to describe the reason for downtime. All right, so next, I'm gonna go a little bit out of order here. So we'll come back to the well pressure tab. I wanted to show you here first on the wellhead monitoring tab. We finally see some of that information in blue that is not required under LMR, but is needed for the EPA. So I'm sure, as many of you know, in partially approving California's state plan last year, EPA and CARB determined that the LMR is equally or more stringent as the federal emission guidelines in all provisions, with the exception of certain wellhead monitoring requirements. So here we have included these additional requirements that were omitted from the LMR in hopes that this allows you to put together a single annual report that meets both the state and federal requirements. So the information that's needed down here in the table should be fairly straightforward. We've also included some excerpts from the emission guidelines here as a reminder that for the corrective actions that aren't able to be completed within 60 days, there are some additional requirements to notify the EPA or to get approval from the EPA. And so we wanted to, make real clear here that the reporting entity is responsible for submitting those notifications or getting approval as needed from the EPA. So the idea is, as we do currently, we'll provide all of the annual reports to EPA under our state plan. So as long as you include all of the information that EPA needs in the annual report in your report to CARB, then we'll provide that information to EPA on your behalf. So if you don't include this information, it's not required for compliance with the LMR, so that's fine. Just be sure that you are providing that information that's needed to the EPA. All right, so then back to the wellhead pressure tab. So here the requirements between the two rules are much more similar. And we've included a summary of the LMR requirements up here in this dark blue box. And then again, some information to remind you that in certain circumstances, you're required to submit a notification to EPA or obtain EPA approval. So the table format should be looking pretty similar by now, or familiar by now. We've got the well ID, location, date, the measurement, corrective action, and description. And then these fields here help us confirm which additional corrective action requirements would apply depending on when you were able to correct the situation. All right, so the next tab and the last one in the annual report template where data is required to be entered is the gas collection system expansion. So if any new wells were added during the reporting period, you'd provide that new well ID and the location description, the date that it was installed, and the deadline if it was a required expansion. And then here we have an optional field for you to help us reference back to, if it was a remonitored SEM exceedance that occurred on March 15th, for example, then that would help us orient to that. So that's it. This final field, final tab here is just what we will use to communicate if we need to do any updates to the templates, then we would explain what those changes were. So that's it, and I will pause for any questions here on the annual report template.
Again, folks, you can use the raise hand function to ask questions. I will unmute too. Okay, the first question comes from Jonathan Martinez. Jonathan, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, thank you. I was just wondering if you could one more time explain the difference between the GCCS downtime for 5-day and the 1 hour. So you're saying like, if you have 2 flares and one is down, that would go into the downtime 1 hour. But if it was like a well that was down for a few days, then it would go into the 5-day section. Is that correct?
Yeah, it sounds like you've got it, exactly. So the regulation does define the collection system and what components are considered part of the collection system distinctly from the control system. And so exactly, just as you said, when there's a well that's shut down for any period of time, or all of the wells are shut down, say the blower needs to be turned off and the valves closed and that sort of thing, then that's what if that downtime exceeds 5 calendar days, then you would report that here on the collection system downtime tab. And then if there was any period of time where the control system was shut down, then for more than 1 hour, then that's what you would put on the control system downtime tab.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Yes, that makes sense. Sorry, I guess I just needed to hear it one more time.
No, absolutely, of course.
All right, I see no raising hand.
All right, well then we will just move right along onto the template for uncontrolled landfills. And again, we'll pause for questions after this template and take any other questions that you have over any of the material that we've covered today. Okay, so here, as you can see, this single Excel workbook covers both the waste in place and heat input capacity reports. So the landing page should look pretty similar to the annual report template. One difference that you'll notice is here we don't have any of that additional information that's required for EPA. Certification tab, just as we saw in the annual template, that's important to make sure you include for any report that's submitted to CARB. And then again, just a reminder to provide us that contact information for whoever we should reach out to if we have questions or find that there's missing information in the report. The information on this tab should be really similar to what we went over previously. There's a fewer fields here because these are not controlled landfills, but otherwise pretty much the same information there, so we won't take too much time on that. And then your waste in place and cover types, of course, we will enter the reporting year, the waste in place in short tons. For waste in place reports, the annual acceptance rate is optional. If you're a closed landfill, you can just enter 0 there. And then let us know the permitted area for disposal, the acres under each cover type, and again, provide that topographic map with the % of final cover that's in place. So if you are a landfill that's under 450,000 tons of waste in place and you're only required to submit a waste in place report, then that's it. You would just submit these or complete these 3 tabs and submit your report. Otherwise, if you're above that waste in place threshold and required to calculate your heat input capacity, then you would also complete this tab. So here again, we'll put in the reporting year. And then this is the result, the heat input capacity result that you've calculated. And so, the main thing that we're looking for here is to confirm that the landfill remains under that 3.0 threshold, at which point a GCCS would be required to be installed. The next couple of fields here are only required for those landfills that determine their heat input capacity by measuring the landfill gas flow rate and methane concentrations. And these questions here under the heat input capacity determination method are intended to help you make sure that you're using the right process for calculating your heat input capacity. So here, let's say that my landfill does not have a carbon absorption or passive venting system, so I'll select none. And you'll see that the template instructs you to calculate your heat input capacity using CARB's landfill gas tool, which is the same as the procedure that's specified in the regulation Appendix 1. And so if we use that tool, then the sheet will remind us to submit that completed tool along with the report. And we'll take the heat input capacity that's calculated by the tool based on the waste in place and enter the heat input capacity here. Now, if instead let's say you do have a carbon absorption system in place, then the sheet's going to instruct you to provide your site-specific measurement data and calculation below row 15. So if we scroll down here, you'll see that some space has been provided for you to put in to show us the calculation that you use to determine your heat input capacity. And then the next field here is for the surface emissions monitoring demonstration. So if your heat input capacity was calculated as less than 3, you can just let us know that that's not applicable. Otherwise, let's say you are doing the surface demonstration and this is a reminder to you to include those records along with your heat input capacity report. Or maybe you tried the surface emissions demonstration but determined that you do need to proceed to install a GCCS. You can let us know about that. Or there's another option, if none of those quite apply to you, and you can explain your other response down here in this yellow space. So that's it for the heat input capacity report as well. And again, we have that final tab for us to let you know if we do any updates to the templates. So any questions on that? While we're waiting for any raised hands, I'll just remind you that we do invite you to let us know if you run into any issues trying to use the templates. We're happy to answer questions, and that feedback is also helpful for us to improve our user guide over time and potentially make updates to the templates for future reporting years. So we're really eager to hear from you and how your experience goes using the templates for this first year.
Right. Honestly, I see. Well, we have a raising hand from Jonathan Martinez. Jonathan, I have unmuted you. You can unmute yourself and begin.
Okay. Hello, it's me again. So I'm still a little new to report writing. And overall, this Excel sheet is very helpful, just so you don't forget anything. But there was a site I was looking at, and for some reason, the flare was down more than it was being operated. So I think it was like out of 24 hours a day, it was only operating around 8, I think. So since, technically it's down longer than an hour, would I need to like kind of put that in to the downtime, or would I just supply like supporting documentation just saying like, I'm not entirely sure who approved it to only run for 8 hours out of a 24-hour period. And those details might not be exactly correct, but it was like I quickly looked at an old report for that site.
Great, yeah, thank you. No, that's a wonderful question. So yeah, really important reminder there that anytime the GCCS isn't being operated continuously, that does require an approved alternative compliance option. So we would want to look back at those records, and I think typically in that situation, we try to make really clear if there are any revised reporting requirements. We generally do still want you to, even if it's routinely only operating for a given number of hours per day or, days per week or something like that, we do still want you to, of course, keep those records and describe the downtime to CARB so that we can, make sure that it's still meeting the requirements under the ACO. And, if over time that amount of operational time isn't able to be upheld eventually, then we would want to go back and reevaluate what could be done in that situation and maybe update that ACO. So beyond that, I think, we might want to, have an offline meeting and talk a little bit more closely about the specifics of that case. But yes, in general, I would say be sure and include any of that downtime, both GCCS and control device, collection and control device downtime.
Okay, so include both the flare being down and the wells associated with the flare?
Yes, correct.
Yes, both. Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Certainly, yeah, thanks for the question.
All right. The next question comes from Joseph Fish. Joseph, I have activated your microphone. You can begin now.
Good afternoon. This was a very good presentation. Thank you for this. I have a very general question. I'm just kind of curious. You're collecting a whole lot of information. I'm just wondering, what are you doing with all the information? I mean, are there some decisions, regulatory decisions being made, or is this just purely a record keeping exercise? Or this is a lot of information you guys have to sort through. I'm just curious what happens to it and what do you do with it?
Yeah, this is Matt. I can respond to that. This is a lot of information, and what we're doing is evaluating compliance with the landfill methane regulation. One thing that we're hoping that these templates will help with is to help entities who are required to report to just report what's required and not report more, because in some cases we were finding out that we were getting information that we didn't actually need. So these templates collect the minimum amount of information to comply with the regulation. In short.
Okay, so this is just primarily a compliance tool.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And a reporting
cool.
tool.
All right, cool. Good to know. Thank you.
But it is voluntary.
All right. Next question again comes from Jonathan Martinez. Jonathan, I have activated your microphone. You can begin now.
Just kind of going off that about like cutting out excess stuff that wasn't needed. Do you have any examples just kind of off the top of your head of like info that you were getting that wasn't necessarily needed, but you're getting a lot like in different reports?
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to talk about that a little bit. So, you know, one example is, as I mentioned, we're getting individual flare downtime being reported, and that's, you know, can be hard for us to interpret whether that was, you know, time that gas was being collected and there were no devices that were operating to manage it. So that's one example. I think we also get things like calibration records, you know, sheets and sheets and sheets of like wind speed or, you know, weather data, which, you know, is, I believe is a record keeping requirement, but isn't something that CARB needs. So often, you know, the reports that we receive are, you know, 200 to 400 pages, and do include a lot of those source records that aren't necessary. Another example might be some folks include all of their surface emissions results, not just the ones that are defined as exceedances or the readings above 200 that are required to be reported, you know. And so that's, you know, not required to be reported. So that makes us, you know, sort of sift through and see how many of the, you know, again, tables and pages and pages of information, how many of those were exceedances. So of course, in an Excel format, we can more easily, you know, sort through that and see what is above that threshold that is required to be reported. But, you know, it is unnecessary to report that to us for those areas that are in compliance. So those are a few examples. I'm sure there's other ones, but does that help?
Oh yeah, definitely. I was actually just transferring over data for a sim event, and I literally put every single recording, not just ones over 200. So I will have to talk about that with my supervisor.
Thanks, appreciate it. Of course, we'll accept it if you do give us all of it, but it certainly makes our jobs a little bit easier when it is limited to the information that's required.
All right, I see no raising hands.
Thanks, Joe. All right, well, if that's it, then we'll go ahead and I'll pass it over to Matt to close us out for the day.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. I guess everybody gets an hour of their time back. As I mentioned at the beginning, we had prepared about an hour of content, and we're reserving time to hear from you all on, you know, questions, etc. So I'll wrap up with a few pieces of information for you. This slide contains 3 links. They'll be available on our website. The first link is where you can access the templates in the user guide that Antti showed you a little bit ago. The second slide, perhaps the most important, is our contact information. So feel free to reach out to us If you have questions about using the templates, if you have questions about the regulation, if you have particular issues you want to discuss, we are here, we are available. We are looking forward to talking to you. And the third piece is a link you can use to sign up to make sure that you're getting notices. We've created a listserv type of thing to follow what's happening with landfill methane reporting specifically. So this is how we will notify you all of updated templates, future trainings, upcoming reporting deadlines, etc. So again, thank you very much for your time, and I'm not seeing any other questions. So enjoy your afternoon, and this concludes the training. Thanks.
All right, there is a final question from Jonathan Martinez again.
Okay.
Jonathan, I have activated your microphone.
Hi, yes, one last quick question. Is it possible to like kind of, I don't want to say like a dummy version of just like filling in this template for a site and kind of just sending it to someone, be like, hey, is this like, does everything look okay with this? If not, that's totally fine, but I thought I would just kind of ask if that's a possibility.
Yeah, we are happy to respond to questions that you might have that follow on this, or if you have questions about interpreting the user guide or the templates or how to use them, just feel free to reach out to the email, and one of the people on this webinar today will follow up with you.
Well, I meant like actually filling in the template itself and like saving it as like a for this site for this year and being like, hey, does everything for this report in the template look correct, kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we can take a look.
Got it. Okay. I'll definitely keep that in mind. Thank you.
Okay. Great. All right, Joe, are you seeing any other hands? I am not.
No, I'm seeing no raising hand.
Okay, cool. Well, then this concludes the training. Thank you very much, everyone.